Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I'm really excited to be talking to Theresa Lyons. Theresa, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
And I should have said Dr. Theresa Lyons, but you're going to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are professionally, the work you do, and you also have a personal story. So go ahead.
Sure. Yes, so the doctor comes from having a PhD in computational chemistry from Yale. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry first in R&D, so understanding how to make a drug and optimize it with protein or whatever the target was. I then also worked as a medical strategist for a consulting company for the pharmaceutical industry, and that was really understanding how do physicians write prescriptions, how do you generate business and revenue from a pharmaceutical company point of view. And then my daughter was diagnosed with autism, and all of that career-wise stuff came to a stop, and I applied it all to my daughter. And now I'm teaching parents the science of autism.
Ah, excellent. You teed that up for us beautifully. So before we hit record, we had a mini conversation. I'm hoping to, we'll extend it and enlarge it here. People mean different things when they say the science, or
Yes.
or when people say the science, it becomes clear that we're not all talking about the same thing. So when you say the science of autism or behind autism, what are you talking about, and how do you approach that?
So what I'm talking about are scientific publications. You go to PubMed, that's the general website when you want to search for the science, the actual science that has been done and published and peer reviewed and vetted and discussed, at conferences and presentations, all of that. That is the science, right? And so it's important to get quality information from as close of the source or a trusted source if it's being interpreted for you. And I could give a clear example how I almost got railroaded by the science. So this was way back in the beginning of my journey. So my daughter has been diagnosed over 10 years now. And right, I'm a PhD scientist. I didn't PubMed was not new to me. I had been using PubMed for probably over a decade before my daughter was diagnosed with autism. That's how you come up to speed in any research areas, therapeutic areas. So I did a lot of research, and I saw publications in autism over the decades, small publications that said for a certain percentage, kids with autism, their diagnosis is not lifelong, which was startling. So back, in 2015, I'm reading this and I thought, is this true? So, I reach out to the authors of the publications, talk to them, and they're like, yes, we call that an optimal outcome. That was the phrase that was used. And then just around that time, I'm, on Yahoo, I'm reading articles, right? These are mainstream articles that they feel like they should have weight. These are trustworthy. And so I read two articles that were written in the same day, and it was saying how autism is lifelong and it's debilitating and just all this negative stuff. And I got so just flustered. What is this? So I have the science, right? The science. These are publications, PDFs, right? A lot of times they cost like $50 each publication just to read them. And then I have this Yahoo where it's like, but this is mainstream. This is what everybody is saying it is. And so I reached out to the author and said, can you explain to me like where you got your research? And I really want to know more about your writing process. And he very kindly admitted to me that he researched those articles, both of them, in 1 hour because he had a deadline. And so he did not know the science, but he was talking about the science. He's just regurgitating what mainstream information was out there. So understanding the science is really important because it's so easy to just be swayed, right? I almost like changed my course of action based upon these two articles because I'm thinking this is a main publication. And back in the day, Yahoo was where you would go for that was like the homepage for everybody. And it was completely false. And my daughter would have an entirely different and not good life if I had listened to that mainstream rather than knowing the science, the actual truth.
Say something about when a study is done and conclusions are drawn, and let's talk about quality in a second, but a study is done, conclusions are drawn. How long from that time until an idea, a concept, a result, a conclusion enters the public mindset as being true?
Okay, brace yourself.
Yeah.
Brace yourself. 20 to 30 years.
Okay, say that again.
It takes 20 to 30 years on average for scientific conclusions to be then translated into mainstream medical common knowledge and practice.
I think that I have full body chills, and the reason is because I feel really vindicated right now. Because as a person who is, as a practitioner who is interested in looking holistically, who is interested in the science, because I don't want to be prescribing, and I can't prescribe anyway, but I don't want to be recommending rabbit holes, fruitless rabbit holes to parents. That's the
Right.
last thing I want to do. However, on the other side of that, nor do I want to be propagating 30-year-old information to people who need action and treatment now.
Right.
So
Exactly. It's a balance, but if you have a 5-year-old and you're waiting for the information rather than proactively finding quality sources, your child would be 35 by the time some of this information is going to reach you. And unfortunately, that's what happens for many kids. But parents have to be proactive. They have to go out and search and ask these questions, and not be satisfied when their intuition is saying, no, I think there is something to do. I think, that little voice that's saying, oh, this is not right. Yes, everybody is saying this is what to do, but that just doesn't feel right. Parents have to listen to their intuition about that.
I think you're such an interesting person to be delivering this message, because you have this very illustrious elite science background, and you're saying to parents, trust your gut if something doesn't feel right. And before we hit record, you said, so tell the people on who are listening about the TikTok statistic that was really
okay, so the science, right? There is a research publication on this, shows. So there were scientists that analyzed the top 100 or so videos related to autism on TikTok. And so it was the most popular, which ones are getting the most views, and right. So that's how information is getting disseminated. And so they looked at each video, and then they looked at the science in each of the video, and they quantified it as whether it was true, whether it was false, or overgeneralized. And 70% of the top videos about autism on TikTok were classified as either wrong or overgeneralized.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens when you don't have a quality source. And what happens on TikTok is videos get views based upon just engagement. So if you're sitting there watching a video that is blatantly wrong, but you're thinking about it, you're watching it, TikTok is going to serve you up more things like that. So the views don't necessarily mean credibility. It just means views. And that's the problem with these algorithms.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it so interesting, right? You are having two sides. You are very squarely looking at all of the angles here, which I so appreciate, in terms of where people are getting their information. Is it quality information? How recent is it? Are we relying on old notions of what we can and cannot do? But also, are we relying on, again, quality sources, novel sources of information, and using that for the benefit of, in this case, your child and other people's children?
Right.
I wonder if you can speak to, and I know we don't have time for like the list of things that, but you mentioned diet before we hit record. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the science says about dietary interventions in autism? I'm super curious about this.
Sure. So diet can get complicated very quickly.
Mhm.
There are about 8 different diets that are commonly used to address symptoms in autism, right? And so this is where having a good strategy is really important. So if a parent is thinking, okay, diet is a problem, I need to somehow change that, then you have to get clear on what the symptoms are so that you can choose the right diet. So there's different publications showing impact on gluten-free, right? Gluten-free is something that's common. Why do people go gluten-free? It's because the mechanism of action. The mechanism of action for gluten is we eat it, it goes into our gut. It makes our gut more permeable. It's just a mechanism of action. It's a molecule, and there's a protein. And when that gluten molecule eventually ends up interacting with that protein, it just says open sesame. So then the gut gets more permeable for everybody. When I eat gluten, when you eat gluten, it's all the same. And then not only that, we have those same kind of protections on our brain and our central nervous system, so our spine, everything that really needs to be protected has that mechanism. And so gluten then opens it up. And then the immune system now has a mess it's got to clean up. And so if a child is having, let's say, other issues, like there are risk factors revolving, let's just say air pollution. Air pollution is one, it's not really debated. The increased risk for autism when a child is exposed to a particular small matter, air pollution, increases by 60%, right? So if a child has that kind of issue going on with their immune system, it doesn't need more things to do. It needs less, right? So that child would benefit greatly for a gluten-free diet because the immune system then wouldn't have to be occupied trying to clean things up. So diet gets very complex very quickly because you have to understand the whole picture of the child. But the science the research publications, maybe that's what I should start saying now, the research publications, right, show in the majority of clinical studies looking at gluten-free diets and kids with autism, the majority show a benefit. And there's lots of nuances with diet, right? So gluten-free doesn't mean, okay, my child only has, 2 cookies and everything else is gluten-free, right? Like that's not gluten-free, right? So sometimes parents do that and do things and then they're like, okay, we're gluten-free, but we have cheat days every weekend, we eat donuts on Saturday. Like that's not gluten-free, right? So you're lessening up the burden on the immune system and you're going in a good direction, but that's not really gluten-free. So you can't then compare your results with a scientific publication of a clinical trial that, documented, okay, these children didn't have any gluten for 3 months, and then this is the benefit that has been seen.
I think that's such an interesting point, and I think you correct me if I'm wrong here, but the general framework that you appear to be operating in is this like load theory, which is the immune system, the body, all of our systems have they perhaps we're born with a certain capacity. We have then certain exposures to things that reduce that capacity, and when we arrive at capacity, now we've got symptoms. So to your point, like some people can eat bread all day and they feel fine. And some people have a half a slice of toast and they're in bed for the rest of the day with bloating
Very
and
true.
severe gastric distress. And they don't have celiac. Like,
Mm-hmm.
right. And we can sort of classify out medical conditions that would say, yeah, your body really can't metabolize this. Is that where you're kind of sitting, or is it more nuanced than that? And please help me.
It's definitely more nuanced in the sense of understanding what the research publications have shown increased risk,
Okay.
right? Because that's where you can't say causation, right? We can't say that air pollution causes autism, right? We can say there's an increased risk. We can even quantify air pollution, the small particle matters, PM 2.5. We can even quantify them. Okay, exposure while third trimester of pregnancy versus, young childhood, right? So the risks are actually different. There's a 60% increase in risk for the small child, so toddler ages. If they're exposed to air pollution, they have a 60% increase in the risk for autism. Whereas when a woman is pregnant in the third trimester, that same exposure, the risk only increased by 30%. So these are all the things to understand when you're thinking of this load theory. And it's really trying to understand, okay, what are the health challenges for my child? And so when you understand these potential large buckets that contribute to risk, which many people won't argue about the science on risk, it just gets really convoluted when you're trying to say this causes autism, because you have genetics that play into all of this, and you have the environment. And not everybody reacts the same way to the same environment. So it's going to be really, really difficult to say that one particular thing causes autism, right? Like for everybody, it's just not realistic. So you have to understand these different aspects so that as a parent, you could say, what is relevant to my child? Because I can't just base what I'm doing on what somebody else did, because genetics and environment are entirely different. So that's where that whole analysis comes from, to really have an impact in the child. And understanding like the load it's really understanding their body and their chemistry, things like vitamin D status, right? Something so basic, right? Many kids are deficient, even by conventional medicine standards, they're deficient in vitamin D, which is one of your foundational nutrients that you need for your immune system to be functioning. So there's so much that can get wrapped up. So you have to understand risk, but then you also have to understand basic health as well.
Based on your understanding of the field as it relates to autism and studies that are being done, what are some of the areas that parents should be looking into? Not specifics on like what to do for this child, but like what are the broad buckets that people aren't necessarily considering when they're thinking about their autistic child? And I'll tell you, from a mainstream perspective, it's speech therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, or maybe DIR floor time. These are all behavioral therapies that are not at all tackling any kind of underlying physiological, neurological, or like disease that's happening, underlying conditions that might be going on. And so, what does your education tell you and your experience tell you about that?
Sure. So there's a lot of aspects, right? And so part of it is diet, right? That we didn't even get into food allergies, classic food allergies. There's also food sensitivities. Sometimes parents will note, wow, like I had a parent I worked with, and when the child ate tomatoes for dinner in any kind of formulation, they didn't sleep, right? So there's one aspect, right? And if you don't sleep, now you're starting to really disrupt a lot of biological processes. And there are two research scientific publications showing that when kids with autism don't get quality sleep, their autistic symptoms actually increase, right? So this is how it can all get complicated. So sleep is definitely one of those first steps. How do we get this child to be sleeping? What is causing that issue? And it's different for each. Sometimes it's a vitamin D deficiency. Sometimes it is this food sensitivity. Sometimes it's, something like an iPad late at night, right? So there's, yeah, there's all of these different contributing factors, but that's why you want to have that thorough analysis and really come at it from wanting to understand what is the chemistry going on so that you could help this child.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say chemistry, blood work?
Sure,
or
blood work, definitely. It's
what are
not
we talking about?
that's not my first choice,
Okay,
right?
go. Tell me what's your
With
first choice. Yeah.
with a kid. So you certainly could, but usually a urine test to really understand the gut, different infections. You want to start with these big root causes in health and really be exhaustive in how you're doing things. You want to be methodical. You don't want to start too granular. You want to cover your bases. Hydration, right? How much is the child drinking? Are they pooping every day? Are they like, so there's a lot of basics, which unfortunately for autism, a lot of people, doctors included, say, oh, that's just autism. That's just the way it's going to be. It's only going to get worse, right? And that's not true whatsoever. I don't think we talked about the 2023 research publication yet,
No, go
showing showing that 37% of kids with autism lost their diagnosis. And the scientists are now having a new phrase for that, right? Because that number is so significant. Their scientists are now talking about autism as there being a subset of non-persistent autism. That's the new scientific phrase. And so parents want to be aware of that and get current information like we talked about in the beginning, because you'll take a very different approach to your child if you know 37%. Wow, that is significant.
It's so interesting. I've had many people on this podcast who have alluded to this notion that, and I believe it too, which is what we say is autism is not always autism. We're alluding to a set of behaviors that we can observe that tell us a tiny bit, but not the whole picture, not nearly the whole picture of what's happening internally to someone. I mean, if we even talk about certain kinds of infections where autistic like symptoms then emerge, like that's not autism. So, and again, I don't want to get into, yeah.
Technically, the diagnosis for autism is based on observation. So unfortunately, what happens is chemistry and biology and health gets just deteriorated to the point where the child is severely behind in development, and then it becomes obvious through observation, okay, there's a problem. And then it's up to the parents to start sorting out, okay, what is the issue with health? And it's unfortunate in that so much time has to pass before something is done and there's a recognition of this is an issue. We need to get more proactive. Even though autism diagnoses can be made as early as 18 months, so that's as early as it can be. It's just a lot of times parents get told, well, let's just wait and see.
Oh,
And it's not a good approach because typically things aren't going to improve just magically on their own. I would love for it, but it doesn't work like that.
yeah, yeah. I know that there is so much more you could say about this. We're going to wrap this up in a second. Is there
There's
anything?
lots. I
I
know, not
know.
enough time.
Is there anything that you want to say here that that we didn't cover that's kind of putting a nice little bow on this? And then I will, of course, ask you to tell the people where they can find you. So some closing remarks.
Sure. Closing remarks. I would say to a parent to trust their intuition and be willing to do the work and think of it more as investing, right? So there's gonna be tough days. There's gonna be nights where you're putting in extra work to learn all things about autism and figure out strategies and what are you gonna do. But it has to be done. Otherwise, the trajectory of your child's life can be very, very different and not in the direction where parents want. So if you want to change that course, it's like turning a boat. You have to really work at it and it slowly turns around. So you have to have like just belief and faith in yourself through this whole entire journey. It's not an easy one in many ways. There's many reasons why you would give up and get too tired, but just trust that inner voice that tells you, I know this can be different. It can be.
Nice. I love it. If people want to learn more about you, Dr. Lyons, what do they do?
check me out on YouTube. You can certainly search my name, Theresa Lyons. There's 10 years of videos. You can get really lost in a lot of science for sure. And then you can also visit me on navigatingautism.com. And autism, I spell very differently. I spell it AWETISM. So it's navigating autism spelled differently.
Very good. We will link to all of that in the show notes. And Theresa Lyons, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.